Hey guys, so I got a comment from a dude who was asking me if I could talk a bit about when to retire some equipment. And so I got sort of a selection with me today, but mainly I'm going to be talking about belay devices and carabiners. Really, the main way how you wear out your gear is the rope running through the metal equipment, whether that be the rope running through your quick draw when you're lowering off of a sport climb, or the main one is when you're lowering yourself on rappel. That's really what we're talking about in terms of wear. There's other factors like if you were left your sport quick draws on your project outside and they got battered by the elements, that's a different type of wear. You got to look at it and make sure that everything's all good. When it comes to like sling materials, you want to look around. Dirt isn't as much of a factor, but if you look close right here, and if the camera will focus, you can see little hairs right there popping up. That's mainly because all these, like this contraption is made with tons of different fibers woven throughout, and all those little hairs poking out are each individual strand of fiber that actually broke. And so hollow blocks for me specifically are kind of different. I tend to get a new one every 2 years. I do switch between two separate hollow blocks, but so that means like maybe now I'll get a new one every 3 years or so. But if you have just one hollow block, and with how much I use it, I tend to get a new one every 2 years. With specific slings, those can vary quite a bit different. This is a pretty old sling, from maybe 2012 or so, but I barely used it up until recently, and so it's kind of more okay to use this. You can just look over the sling, look for any burn marks, any wear patterns, any slight cuts in the sling. Just sort of go over it, just like so. Feel every part of the sling for something weird, like this. Looks like I just found something weird. It's hard to see in the camera, but that's a little section of the dynamo that must have gotten caught and burned on something at some point, probably during a rappel. So is that worth worrying about? In this case, not exactly, because it hasn't cut into the sling. It's more just a little thing that got pushed out and then burnt. And things like that will happen over time. In general, if there's not a huge cut, then your sling is still good. When in doubt, you do want to retire it though, because it's just not really worth it. As far as ropes go, any number of things can cause ropes to be retired. I've had a number of ropes go core shot on me. I get a core shot maybe halfway through or somewhere else. I actually had one of my nice ropes get core shot about like 6 inches from the end of the rope because it was tied together with another rope in your standard BHK, and it rubbed against the wall just right, and yeah, it just went core shot on me. So I had to cut that part of the rope off, and I just lost 6 inches off of one of my nice sterling arrows. So yeah, that was always fun. Can't seem to be able to make it through an AMGA course without ruining one of my ropes. So that's usually the most abrupt time to retire a rope. Another thing could just be old age. Soft goods, different manufacturers will say different things, but usually for slings or ropes, 6 to 8 years is kind of the max. And then generally with how much you use them, my ropes probably are more like 4 or 5 years. And generally speaking too, the more equipment you have, the more lifespan, because you aren't wearing it out as fast. If you have just one rope and you're a dirt bag climbing 200 days a year, probably just want to get a new rope every year. You can see this other section on the rope right here. This is something that if you get it in your rope, cause for alarm. It's just a lot of the fibers of the sheath got rubbed out, so this thing probably rubbed against a rock just the right way and frizzed it out. Now sometimes these aren't anything to worry about because the core could still be intact on the inside. Great way to test for that is if I go to a good section of the rope, see how I can bend it like this, and that's kind of naturally, it doesn't want to bend any more than that, and so you can see the core is intact right here just by the rigidity of the rope. This thing, I can bend it a little bit further, but sometimes that's not exactly a cause for alarm. I can check the other side. A lot of times, or sometimes with core shots, the whole thing will just go flat, like no big deal. And so that's going to be an issue. Another good test is if you just press around, you can sort of feel the rope go soft in a certain point. And actually, I can even see it a little bit where right here, if you press on it, the area is soft, and I can rotate the rope around. I can feel the softness pretty much in the entire core. And so that pretty much means that the core is damaged right there, and you should retire the rope, which is exactly what this is. This is an old retired rope. Now, sometimes you get lucky and it's close to the end of the rope, and you know, maybe it won't be, maybe you could just cut it down and make a 40 meter out of it or something like that and use it for the gym. But other times it's right in the middle. That's always fun. Modern ropes that are dry treated, or some of them, I've even read like some ropes have this edge protection sort of deal, and that's just made with like sort of a tighter or stronger sheath that make it a bit more edge resistant. Modern day climbing ropes are pretty adverse to edges. Obviously, if you're big walling or something, then your rope still wears out super fast. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say about soft goods. It is nice to check your gear every now and again, and not just like your slings from your alpine draws or your anchor slings, but also all the nylon or Dyneema webbing from your cams, your harness too, belay loops, and your hard tie-in points are kind of big areas of wear. Anywhere with your buckles, and leg loops tend to, any large loop of fabric tends to show the least amount of wear. But also if you compare your harness to a new harness at a store, you can see how much it's faded from the sun, and that can make a big deal. Generally speaking, harnesses, they last for, you know, again, like about 6 to 8 years, depending. Actually maybe closer to like 5 or 7 years. Just look at whatever your manufacturer for your specific harness says, and then go off of their recommendation. Alright, so moving on to metal gear. Like I said before, it really depends a lot on how much you rappel and how sandy the area you're rappelling on is. If you climb a lot in red rocks like I do, then there's a lot of sand there, and that'll wear out your material faster, especially if the sand is a little wet, because it'll stick to the sheath of your rope, and once you start rappelling on it, all those little sand grains will, you know, run out your ATC and your locker. That's what I'm going to show you. That's kind of the main way how you get wear in your stuff. That's why if you talk to like canyoneer folks, they have like ridiculous grooves in their lockers, because they're always have wet ropes which are covered in sand, and they're always doing 1,000,000-foot rappels on these materials. So, you know, of course they're going to wear out super fast. Again, if you're like in Washington, where a lot of our you know, straightforward rock routes, you have to rappel off, and when you're putting, you know, 10 to 12 rappels on these things, they're not going to last forever. And that's sort of the big point here, is your gear just won't last forever. If you want stuff that'll last forever, then buy a steel locker, get a steel belay device. Italrid makes some great versions where it's like a full-on locker with a little steel plate right here. They'll last quite a while. You can use their Megajoule, which is made out of steel. You know, those materials just last like 5 times as long as aluminum. So here's kind of the first example I have. A locker, and you can see I got nice little rappel grooves right there. So this locker is not super old. I do find that Black Diamond gear does tend to wear out faster than other companies. Even like Italrid again, even their aluminum lockers tend to last pretty long. It's kind of cool, but here's like basically a new one. And then here is the comparison. You can see the rappel grooves on the top carabiner. And so manufacturers basically recommend, they all probably recommend something different, but usually about 1 millimeter of wear is when you want to retire. And so essentially, like, what is 1 millimeter, right? I think it's when you can really start to feel that groove. Like, I think it really means when you can start to feel this groove. I can feel this spot right here in the middle between the two groove marks, and it's clearly 1 millimeter of wear back into the carabiner. Now, that's not to say you can't get away with doing, you know, 40 or 50 more rappels on this thing, but you do want to be careful, and I just outright retired this guy. I was digging through all my old gear the other day, and I found this one. This is a Madrock locker. It has a bit of a thicker band right here, but it also has more rappel grooves on it. And so same deal, this ridge in the middle, I can really feel that without, like if I was in the dark and I had to find this carabiner, I could find it just by feeling that ridge. And so that's right there in my time when I choose to retire it. and now I use this for holding other devices or whatever. But that's just another example of when to retire a locking carabiner. It's definitely had a lot of repels on it too. Alright, so moving on to Belay Devices, and this is going to start a little rant with me because I just sort of noticed this. I have two different ATCs right here, and I also have like a brand new one for comparison. And so let's start with the older BD-ATC. And I say older because you know how they redesigned them like 2 years ago or something. So this is like the newer model. Here's the older model that I'm sure a ton of people still have. And so the way how you sort of know when these are done, a lot of people tend to look at the teeth, and you can see my teeth are pretty much fully worn out. They're even like sort of starting to blend in with each other. But the teeth aren't exactly what you're looking for. On these ATCs, you want to find a sharp edge. This edge, it's a little sharp. It's not super sharp. I find after I do like 5 or 6 repels on it, they get sharper. But this edge isn't approaching, like this slot is getting worn out by the rope, but it's not approaching the end right here. What I think is really the big teller on these things is this middle guy. And it's kind of hard to see. Oh, there we go. You see that little dent right there? And then there's another dent right there. It tends to sort of work its way in harder from one side than the other. But basically, once this gets sharpened down to a fine point, that's kind of when these specific ATCs are done. Now, there are other factors that can make you want to retire this thing before that, but that's sort of what my major tell is for these guys, is once you get a sharp edge that could possibly damage your rope, and it seems like this is definitely the place where you're going to get the most sharp edge. Now, this is because, again, from rappelling, and I always load my brake strand on this side, climber, and, rappel on it like this, sliding down. And so that's how the teeth get worn out. One thing that does help with increasing the lifespan is flipping this around regularly, putting the brake strand here, and then this stuff won't get worn out as fast. And then this, instead of right here being worn out, it'll be a little bit down that way. Sorry about that light, by the way. I'm trying to block it. But without it, I don't get good lighting. So, it just sort of takes the rope off of that edge. So if you do want to increase the lifespan of these guys, that'll help, but I find that they last pretty long anyway. Here you can see it compared to basically a new one. This guy's had a little bit of rappelling on it. Basically, when I get a new ATC, I take it on like a 10 or 15 pitch climb, where I know I have to rappel that, and then I just do a ton of rappels on this to wear down the teeth a little bit, and then over time they can get fully grooved out like that. Yeah, flip them around. You can see that this is completely flat, or this has none of those grooves in there. It's actually starting to get a little groove. As this guy has, you can see that big groove right there. That's why it's also kind of nice to use colored ATCs, because even though they get scratched up over time, you can gauge the wear a little bit easier than, say, the gray ones. Alright, so here's my rant now, is the new ATCs from Black Diamond. They made them smaller, so that way they could be lighter, but in doing so, they wear out faster. I've had this thing for a year or a year and a half at most, and granted, I do switch around between different ATCs, so it's not like this is the only thing I used, but I've had this guy for like 2.5, maybe 3 years. It's still going strong, still has like, it could still have like 80, 100 more rappels left in it. This thing didn't get me through too many, and that's mainly because of the new geometry. Here's a brand new one, so I can show you guys the comparison. Or here, let me do this. So here's the old one. You can see the slight difference. This thing is smaller. There's less material here, and then the slots tend to be a bit smaller too. Not that that really makes a difference, because again, just take them on a route with like 15 rappels and then they're gone. You can see the teeth here. They're a little bit less worn than the other one. But the big thing is right here. The rope just ate away until it was right at the edge. This slot grew like a millimeter or a half a millimeter. Here's the new one. You can see how thin that area is. Then here's where you can see the cutting part. going into the back of this thing. So yeah, just be aware of that. The new BD ones, they wear out a lot faster than the old ones. Actually, it's funny, because of that reason, I've been buying or trading different devices for other people to get my hands on a bunch of old ones, so that way they'll last a bit longer and I don't have to get a new one of these every year or so. Let's also talk about gree-grees real fast, because these can also obviously get worn out just from amount of use. And this is like, if you use the gree-gree Plus, the main wear factor, they actually stuck a steel plate right there. So that's the place where the wear happens the most, and with a steel plate, that'll just last much longer, like I said, with steel from before. On like the gree-gree 2, or the new gree-gree that they just came out with, there's no steel right here. This is kind of hard to see, because this one's silver. If I had like a blue one, it'd be a bit easier to see. See if I can get the right angle. Right there you can see that sort of wear features right there, and I can even feel a little spot where the rope's eaten into it. But the main part is right here, where the rope bends over this plate. And I got like a good groove right there. It's just kind of impossible to see. You can sort of see it bending in the light. There we go. You see the groove now? It's right there. If I block the light, you can see it now. There's like a sort of double groove going on. And so that's where the main wear happens on these things. And you can, again, see it all around this plate right here. Even the gree-gree Plus, you can see some groove marks, or like wear marks right here and here. However, none of these are really anything to watch out for. But that is where you want to keep in mind where your wear is on stuff like the gree-gree. Okay, yeah, so there you have it, guys. That's pretty much everything I had to say about retiring equipment, mainly lockers and belay devices, because that's what I feel like gets retired the most. Basically, anytime there's a part of the carabiner that's been eaten into, you know, there are other times where you have to retire them right away or whatever, if you drop it off a big cliff, stuff like that. It's usually more circumstantial type things. And then when in doubt, just retire it, because it's kind of not worth it, you know. Save $5 on buying another carabiner. Who cares? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.